Hi, I'm Alina,
I'm Emily.
and we are here with Women's March Minnesota interviewing David Zaffron from Take Action Minnesota on the healthcare legislation that is being proposed and voted on in the House on Thursday. He's going to tell us all about it and what we can do to try to resist the American Health Care Act. All right, and Emily will be interviewing.
Thank you so much for joining us today, David. If we could actually start, just for our viewers who may not be really familiar with the history and the day-to-day work of Take Action Minnesota, could you start by just introducing yourself, sort of your role in the organization, and tell us a little bit about the work that Take Action Minnesota does?
Sure, and welcome. Take Action Minnesota is a statewide multiracial organization that believes in building a stronger democracy and government and economy for everybody in Minnesota. And we do that in a number of different ways. One of those is through seeking to build a more democratic healthcare system that truly serves the needs of all Minnesotans. I'm the healthcare program manager at Take Action Minnesota here. It's one of our oldest program areas. Take Action is about 10 years old as an organization. We've done a lot of great work in that time, including fighting for the passage of the Affordable Care Act in the first place, as well as really fighting to defend Minnesota Care several times throughout its history, including with the Affordable Care Act, keeping it alive and currently funding it in full. So those are just a couple of the highlights in recent years, and now obviously in this context we have a lot of work in front of us, both in terms of defending the gains that we've made and hard-fought victories in recent years at the national level, as well as looking forward to the kind of healthcare system we want to build for everybody here in Minnesota.
How exciting that you were part of that, the drive to get the Affordable Care Act passed, and how are you feeling right now, just given, I guess, your personal investment and your institutional investment in getting the ACA, getting that approved? How are you guys feeling now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I have mixed feelings about it. I feel like a lot of folks who worked hard to get it passed have mixed feelings about it, since many of us saw ways in which it could have been stronger in the first place, but we also all realize the ways in which it has been an enormous success in really a couple key ways. One was a significant expansion of our public health care programs that are the most successful part of our entire healthcare system. 20 million more Americans are covered by the Medicaid program than were previously, and that was really what saw the steep drop in the rate of uninsured across the country, including here in Minnesota. It strengthened the Medicare program and made it financially solvent for another 10 years. And then it also curbed the worst abuses of the corporate insurance industry. No more pre-existing conditions, no more getting kicked off because you cost too much, no more lifetime caps. Planned Parenthood has made very clear that the ACA was the biggest leap forward in women's health in a generation. The essential benefits set that affected all privately sold insurance to make sure that it is good insurance. It's really a long list of ways in which it was a very successful law and has been. And unfortunately, all of the focus has been on this pretty narrow piece of it, which is this private marketplace, the exchanges here in Minnesota. It's called MNsure, for the individual health insurance market. So people who aren't part of an employer-based group and aren't on a public program, and so have to buy an individual policy for themselves or their families. And that's been more up and down depending on the state you live in. Here in Minnesota as well, it started off very well on the affordability side of things. It's gotten quickly less affordable for many people, and so that's become the focus of the debate, both at the national level as well as what's happening at the state level this year.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So a lot of strengths. Obviously, there have also been some challenges, but let's pivot now from talking about the ACA and sort of how far we came under the last administration, and talk a little bit about the current headlines about this, the Paul Ryan and President Trump healthcare bill that the House is going to vote on this week. Could you talk a little bit about what that bill entails and what people should know about this bill that they may not already?
Yeah, thank you. I think because of the way that they're seeking to pass this bill, which is through something called budget reconciliation, it only includes things that will cost or save the government money. So it is not a full repeal of the Affordable Care Act, but it would do significant damage to it. And I think more significantly, it goes far beyond damaging and repealing the successful parts of the Affordable Care Act to really gutting the entire Medicaid program as we know it. So as we've seen in the headlines from the Congressional Budget Office and other analyses, up to 14 million people across the country would lose coverage immediately, and that could go up to 26 or 24 million people in another 8 years or so. Through the Medicaid cuts, they are looking to cut about $880 billion in funding to the Medicaid program over 10 years across all states. And I think the biggest headline that's sort of hidden underneath this is that they're doing this to pay for a $500 billion tax cut to the wealthiest Americans and to various corporations that helped pay for the Affordable Care Act in the first place. And so in some ways, this is a gigantic tax cut being paid for by gutting Medicaid. So that's what I think folks should really realize. And the Medicaid piece is a little bit about the how. Not only are they talking about rolling back the expansion of Medicaid, that is what led to this huge drop in those who went uninsured, but they want to essentially cap Medicaid spending for the program as a whole and slowly ratchet it down over time. And that's why the cost to states starts steep and just gets steeper over time. Minnesota would stand to lose about $2 billion per year, every year, from when this started into the future, and that would rise over time to be more of a $2.5 billion cut per year towards the end of a decade. And if you think about the impact that would have on the state, it's not just the 1.2 million Minnesotans on Medicaid or Minnesota Care who could lose their health care coverage. It's people with disabilities and seniors who would see their access to long-term services and supports constrained or cut, or the home care workers and nursing home workers and people who provide those services seeing wage freezes, or it's a huge squeeze on the rest of the state budget, because if the state has to try to fill in that gap of $2 billion a year, either we have to raise taxes to pay for it, or more likely it's a mixture of cuts across Medicaid and cuts across the rest of our state budget, including education and transportation and other priorities. And so this is something that every Minnesotan should be concerned about, no matter what your top priority is.
So it's pretty clear the content of the bill and then the projected impact of the bill it would be pretty disastrous for the public health care system. But so in order to actually understand how we can take action, it would be helpful to hear a little bit about how this bill is being taken forward. So if you could just talk a little bit about that process, and then also highlight where there are some critical decision-making moments when people can be taking action.
Sure. So this started in January when both the House and Senate voted on the bill vehicle for this, which is this resolution for budget reconciliation. It became a House file recently, or more recently, and went through 2 different House committees to actually mark up the draft to the state that it's in now, at least on paper. And it is expected to receive a full vote on the House floor this coming Thursday. So there's a lot of headlines flying about potential changes to it that are being made in order to get enough votes for it to pass the House. The reason for that is that they're in a tough spot. There are the hardline conservative members of the U.S. House who don't think that this bill goes far enough in repealing health care for people, in returning to a completely market-based system, essentially. They've called the reduced tax credits in this bill a new entitlement, just as an example. And so that is one end of the spectrum. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are more moderate members of the House, and especially more moderate senators, who see the need to preserve the Medicaid expansion and to preserve the Medicaid program as a whole, who are not able to and will not vote for the House bill in its current form. And so it is in trouble in that regard, as far as both its ability to pass the House and then its ability to pass the Senate after this, which would be the next step along the way. As far as our ability to impact this, I'll talk in a little bit about what's happening this week around the House vote. But as always, the most effective way for us to impact the votes of our representatives in the House or our senators is to call their offices and share our personal stories with them about the way that legislation impacts us and impacts the people that we know.
And without jumping ahead to sort of like the content of the event, can you just give a shout out to the people that citizens in Minnesota should be reaching out to and should be calling to share their stories and their concern?
Yes, I mean it's always most effective to contact your own legislators, no matter where you live. And I know that for folks living in Minneapolis and St. Paul, sometimes that feels like, well, do I really need to do that because I know that my representative is against this bill? I would encourage you to still make that call, especially if you haven't done so before. Still call our senators, especially if you haven't done so before. But the other way to think about the impact that you can have is most of us know folks who do live in different parts of the state. Think about those people that you do know in greater Minnesota, especially in districts of representatives who are planning to vote for this bill, and make sure that they give a call to them and share their personal story. Unfortunately, it usually is not effective to call people who you are not their constituent. That's always the first question, and they tend to disregard those contacts.
But that's helpful. So encouraging people we know who are represented by maybe some of the people who would be more inclined to vote in favor of this new healthcare law. We could consider reaching out to those family members and friends. So could we pivot now to talk a little bit about the state level discussions that are going on? So there's been so much in the news about Trump Care, so-called Trump Care, Paul Ryan's bill. So with all the news being paid to this, with the repeal of the ACA, we've had a little bit less focus potentially, a little bit less information about what is happening at the Capitol right here in St. Paul. So could you talk a little bit about what some of the key debates are that are taking place right now at the state level that we should all be aware of?
Yeah, and excuse me, as I mentioned, so much of the attention is being paid to this relatively narrow slice of our entire healthcare system, which is people buying individual insurance. And it is with good reason, which is that they've seen the highest variance, the most up and down in their premiums and costs in recent years. And from my perspective, the reason for that is that insurance companies have treated this market as sort of a betting market. It's like, well, we're gonna get in and then see if we make some money, and if we don't, we're gonna get out. And it's led to a really steep up and down in people's healthcare costs. So what we see right now is two different proposals at the state level about how to deal with that and how to make sure that individual health insurance plans remain affordable for Minnesotans who need them. In January, the legislature passed and the governor signed into law an immediate premium subsidy for people in the individual market for 2017. Now the debate is about what to do for 2018, for next year. The insurance industry has demanded what they call reinsurance. They want a direct subsidy from the state of Minnesota to them to soak up their highest cost patients, more or less. And they want this in order to stabilize the marketplace from their perspective. Unfortunately, this would be up to $600 million of state money directly to the insurance industry in Minnesota with no strings attached and no promise that it would actually lead to lower premiums for individuals or fix the problems that people have, especially in parts of greater Minnesota where people can't access the doctor or providers that they want to go to. They're in a very narrow plan. It's from the provider network standpoint. And so, they may be driving 30 miles further away to go to a doctor who's in network instead of the one who's right in their town that they prefer to go to, because that would be considered an out-of-network visit. And that's something that this reinsurance proposal would not fix. There's no assurances of that either. So it's really not a solution. It's unfortunately a blank check. The governor proposed in his budget and in his State of the State address what he's calling a Minnesota Care buy-in. And what this would do is allow anybody in this individual health insurance market the ability to buy into Minnesota Care, buy a version of Minnesota Care through MNsure. So it would be sold through MNsure the same way that other private plans are right now, either a gold or a silver tier plan. And it would have the strengths of Minnesota Care's coverage set as far as the actual access to services, the strength of its provider network across the state, as well as the state's ability to negotiate rates with a large pool of people. All insurance, at the end of the day, is about pooling risk. And one reason that this individual insurance market has been unstable is that it is such a small number of people relative to the whole state. Whereas the Minnesota Care program, combined with everybody on Medicaid, provides for a much wider pool of people for the state to negotiate rates with insurance companies and with doctors and clinics and hospitals. So those are the two competing plans. Right now, the reinsurance proposal is going into what's called the conference committee between the House proposal and the Senate proposal. And at the end of that, they vote on it again, and then the governor signs or vetoes it. And so that's the state of that. Unfortunately, the Minnesota Care buy-in, the governor's proposal, is not currently it's not currently anywhere really. And so neither the House nor the Senate have passed that. It has not even received a hearing in the House. Mm-hmm. And so that needs a push if it's going to happen.
And is that a push that can come, say, from constituents and from organizations? Like, is that something that Take Action will be working on as well? Or is that an area where people should be showing up at the Capitol and showing up through phone calls and sending letters?
Yes, absolutely. And so so call number one, call your federal elected officials to vote no on the American Health Care Act on Thursday in the House and in the Senate later. Call number two, everybody can call the governor's office and ask him to veto this reinsurance proposal since it doesn't solve the problem in front of us and is a gigantic corporate subsidy with no strings attached. And also just to insist for the governor and make clear that we really do need his Minnesota Care buy-in proposal. It was an excellent proposal that he made in his budget, and we're glad that he did, and encouraging him to hold firm on that. But also call your representative and state senator, especially for folks in greater Minnesota, and ask them to push that forward, especially in the House of Representatives. Ask for a hearing for this bill.
That's so helpful. So if everyone just wants to sort of reflect on that and put that on your to-do list, call your federal representatives well in advance of Thursday if you can. That's just 2 days away. And also call the governor's office. Ask him to veto the reinsurance bill.
And the reinsurance bill is House File 5. That's
House File 5 is the reinsurance bill in Minnesota. And then let Governor Dayton know and his team know that we think that we very much need his Min-Care buy-in bill, and we very much want for that to come to the floor. So this is also helpful. If you could now maybe tell us a little bit more about your current activities, your local activities that are trying to, where you're sort of trying to approach policymakers, decision makers, and also mobilize the community. And if you could talk about any upcoming events that you guys have planned.
Certainly. So I'll start on the events side of things for folks who want to get out in the streets and make some noise and more of a protest atmosphere. One tonight, actually, the 21st, from 5:30 to 7, we're going to be joining Neighborhoods Organizing for Change at Northern Metals Recycling on the north side in Minneapolis. And this is an event called From Local to National, the Fight for Water and Save the EPA. And it's really just combining the interests of our climate justice program and environmental focus with a health focus. And so they'll be talking about both the threats to air and water and the environment through Trump's budget to gut the EPA, as well as the threats to the ACA and healthcare generally. So that's tonight at Northern Metals, which is at 2800 Pacific Street in Minneapolis, from 5:30 to 7 p.m. On Thursday, there will be protests essentially at both Representative Eric Paulson's office as well as at Representative Jason Lewis's office. At Representative Paulson's office will be from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And that is at 250 Prairie Center Drive in Eden Prairie. It's sort of across the parking lot from the Eden Prairie Mall. And at the office of Representative Jason Lewis at 4 p.m., which is in Burnsville at 2805 Cliff Road East in Burnsville. And at both of these events, our goal is to make it clear to his office and to both of those representatives that we're watching the way that they vote, and they need to know when they vote on this bill on Thursday what the impact of their vote will be. So bring your creativity, bring your personal stories to share, either with the offices directly or through our activity outside to share how you feel about these threats to healthcare and these attacks on our public healthcare programs.
So in terms of preparation for the event, in particular the protest on Thursday at Representative Paulson and Representative Lewis's offices, people should really come prepared to provide personal testimony about how they'll be affected and make their voice and their individual sort of experience heard.
Yeah, I mean, there's always an opportunity to go in and share that perspective with members of their offices if it's during their hours. Once again, that's always most effective is if you are a constituent in that district. But then also, if you want to just come and join the protest outside their office, make your own creative sign and bring it with, and bring your energy to this and I think the spirit that we all share right now in a resistance to Trumpism broadly, as well as preserving and protecting the gains we've made in healthcare in the last decade.
Great. And I guess just to wrap up, unless we have any questions from our viewers, could you maybe make a few other comments as to how people in the community can support the work of Take Action Minnesota?
I'd love to, yes. So on that front, we are holding phone banks both tonight and tomorrow night here at our office from 6 to 9 p.m. to direct calls to Representative Paulson and Representative Lewis about the American Health Care Act. So you're welcome to join us tonight or tomorrow night. Those are weekly phone banks on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Wednesdays have been regularly on healthcare for the last couple of months. Tuesdays are more variable across our different program areas, which include healthcare, climate justice, criminal justice reform, as well as organizing for a new economy, which right now has a real focus on preserving the earn sick and safe time laws that have been passed in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So those are the four main program areas of Take Action. You can find out more information, sign up for events, donate, become a member at takeactionminnesota.org. That's all one word.
Great. Okay, well, it's been so wonderful to get to sit down with you and hear a little bit about the work and to hear a little more detail about the bills that are in the pipeline that are currently under discussion and exactly what's at stake. And just great to hear more generally about the work that you guys are doing across some different sectors that are so important to community and individuals and family life and health. So I think we'll be wrapping it up there, so thank you so much.
Thank you for coming, and if people do have specific questions for me, you can contact me directly at david@takeactionminnesota.org.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.